Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our continuing coverage of day one of the second annual Dogman and Cryptid conference right here in White Settlement, Texas. We have with us in this segment the amazing David Weatherly. He is the author of an entire series of books of cryptids of the United States. He's also well known for his research into the world of Nephilims, giants, the stories that are contained therein from native cultures, as well as black-eyed children and so many other topics. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be on.
Absolutely. I had a chance to meet you at the Cibolo Paracon, which happened a few months ago. It was a great event. Cannot wait for the second one coming up. And you gave a great presentation there about giants, things like that, the stories that have been around a long time. How did you get into the world of cryptid research to begin with, David?
Well, so this entire field, when you hear me use the term paranormal, I speak in kind of the old school version of it. It's not just hauntings, but, anything beyond the normal.
Anything not normal.
Yeah. It's just kind of a pet peeve that's been sort of co-opted by ghost hunters.
We want to put things in a box,
Yeah,
David.
we do. But, I got involved in this field. I started researching in the 70s. And, I got interested as a kid, and by the time I was a teenager, I was just absorbing everything I could find. And of course, it was a different era. This was pre-internet, obviously, so, there were limited resources, so to speak. So, my early exposure was things like Hans Holzer wrote about ghosts, von Daniken, who wrote, of course, the Ancient Alien Theory books, and things like that. And then I discovered Fate magazine, which was there's a whole story as to how that happened too, because the short version is I was I was still in school. Obviously, I was in high school, and we had this. I lived in a very rural area, but these people came and built a house close to ours. Older couple, and I used to go over and talk to them all the time. And it turned out that the woman was a spiritualist.
Oh,
and
wow.
This is rural North Carolina.
Wow.
At the time, I'm like, she's probably the only spiritualist in that portion of the country at that time,
joke.
So I was like, what is that? So she would tell me all these things. I used to go over and talk to her all the time. And I went over one day, and she's got a copy of Fate magazine. I'm like, what is this? And she says, oh, that's Fate magazine. They comes out every month. And anybody who doesn't know the background of Fate magazine, it started in 47, and a little digest-sized magazine that ran articles about just hauntings, UFOs, cryptids, psychic mysteries, everything you can think of that falls within this spectrum. So I saw this magazine, was blown away. And the short version is she said, well, make sure you come visit tomorrow, after school. So I did. I go over to her house, and she's got this huge crate sitting up front full of Fate magazine. She says, wow, I think I'm done with these. You can have them. So, I was joking. I was like, it's weird. I was too sick to go to school for like several days afterwards.
That's odd.
It was a very odd coincidence, And but man, I tell you what, I just absorbed everything that was in those issues, and that was a big early influence. John Keel was a big early influence. Wow. I met Keel, early on, and, his approach. A lot of people have compared me to him, and, because I take sort of a journalistic approach. But I just love digging into these mysteries. I really do. And I'm intrigued by all of it. Everything from ancient mysteries to giants and cryptids and everything else. And I have been very fortunate because I've spent my life exploring that stuff.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the work of John Keel, because, yes, investigative journalist, like that's what he did.
That's my approach,
and he was not necessarily a believer. He wasn't really a believer in the paranormal, so to speak, or anything like that, but it was through his investigative journalism into the Mothman case that really just rang to him, where like, something else going on here.
Yeah.
And to see that, and to see that even right now with the big move with Graham Hancock,
right,
and everything else, to see the very fervorous reaction from scientists to his work and to the recent series.
Oh,
and
yes.
He's a pseudoscientist.
The outrage.
And the hilarious thing is him saying, never once have I said I'm a scientist. I am a journalist.
Right.
I just go where the evidence leads me.
Exactly.
And Sorry if it's led me here.
Yeah.
But this is where all the evidence has led.
Yeah.
So feel free to disprove the evidence that I have.
That's right.
And
Now,
you very much approach things the same way, which is what I love.
I do. And as I said, there's a few early influences. Keel was a big one. Hans Holzer, because he did that specifically with ghosts. He really dug into stories. Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
Of course, Passport to Magonia was just, mind-blowing when that came out. Of course, Vallée is much more scientific oriented. But, there is one thing that really distinguishes me from a lot of these guys, and that's that I sort of followed a dual track from the time I was young, because the other thing I pursued was what I term real magic. I was interested in shamanism, native cultures and their practices, and I started pursuing that around the same time. And over the years, over the decades now, funny to say, but I've been very fortunate. I've spent time with a lot of teachers from different traditions around the world. I've had an audience with the Dalai Lama. I've taught I've studied with Native American elders, African practitioners, and one of the things that impressed me early on with these people was that whenever something paranormal or supernatural came up, if I presented the topic, the response was simply, "Oh yes, we know about this."
Yeah.
So, from an early age, I understood that when you set aside Western scientific tradition, for instance, and you say, what are all these original cultures? How did they view these things? Oh yeah, we know about it. We know it exists.
Yeah.
These things, they have different ways of understanding it, but it's an acceptance level that is just, I think it's only now starting to slip into the mainstream.
It's interesting because earlier when we were talking with Ryan Edwards, we were discussing toward the end the fact that it had never really dawned on me, but we are very much, as a culture, returning to the campfire. We've had the exploration of science into some of these topics, but when it comes to topics like Dogman and things like that, we have very much come back to the campfire. And we want to hear the stories. We want to hear the encounters,
right,
as opposed to the science, as a society right now. And it's really interesting to see that on all paranormal fronts, because it's like all of them have boiled to the top of the pot right now and are getting ready to simmer over. It's really incredible.
It's really fascinating how it's evolving too, because about 10 years ago I was doing a lecture tour for my book Strange Intruders, and Strange Intruders, the whole idea behind that book was to look at these entities that are coming from somewhere into our realm of existence. And as a result, I examined a wide range. I addressed the jinn, shadow people, some of these entities that people are reporting all over the world, and that there's just really not much understanding as to where they're manifesting from, whether they're, purely psychic energy or mental or, physical, what are they? And one of the things, when I was researching that book, I ended up talking to a lot of quantum scientists, and that in itself was pretty fascinating because, I presented the whole idea in this book to a degree, and certainly in the lectures I expounded on it more. The fact that native cultures all over the world have these ideas about other levels of existence. And, they'll talk about other races that lived here on the planet with us. You can take any one of those isolated traditions. The jinn is a good example. The jinn, the jinn, they were created by Allah, according to Islamic tradition, and they were one of the 3 races that were created. But at some point, they were banished. Now, they didn't cease to exist. And they're still here. But where are they? Because they're not exactly living amongst us. So, that gets into this idea of dimensional levels of existence. And, so lo and behold, 10 years ago, suddenly quantum science is saying, you know what? There's another dozen levels of existence. We don't know how to get there or what's there, but we know they're there.
Oh,
It's like, wow, science is finally deciding to say, hey.
Finally catching up. finally catching up.
Right, to traditions that are, thousands of years old.
Oh,
in some
absolutely,
cases.
absolutely. And even the concept of UFOs, UAPs, they don't have to be from another planet. They could be
Right.
from an adjunct time. They could be
Right.
from an adjunct
Yeah.
parallel universe or dimension.
That's right.
All kinds of things. And
That's
even
right.
even this morning, hearing Josh talk about how quite a bit of Dogman seems to be very much a spiritual experience, almost as though something is manifesting for the viewer.
Right.
What its motivation is, who knows? But that seems to be the phenomenology. And the whole concept that one of the MUFON researchers shared with me at MUFON this last weekend, the idea that three-dimensional objects cast a two-dimensional shadow.
Right. Yeah.
Fourth-dimensional object casts a three-dimensional shadow.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it explains a lot as to vibrationally why maybe you can see it and I can't at the same time.
Yeah, levels of
things like-
perception.
exactly,
Yeah, that's what you get
exactly.
into. And it's funny, we were talking about kind of coming full circle. We're talking about these ideas of coming back to the campfire, so to speak.
Yeah.
Well, even within science, I'll never forget one of the quantum scientists. He looked at me straight on and he said, science is broken. And he said that what has happened is a lot of people, he said, like myself, we were traditionally interested in pursuing science, but once we got really involved and became scientists, we realized that it had reached an endpoint. And where do you go from there? And says a lot of quantum scientists have turned to God and turned to spiritual ideas and concepts because they have to find something that breaches that false wall that has been created by traditional science.
Well, it makes you want to keep exploring.
Oh, absolutely.
Because at some point, like we show a video regularly of the young scientist who was in charge of Lockheed Martin's miniaturized nuclear reactor.
Right.
And he's probably about 28 in the video that came out in 2012. He's standing in front of something about the size of a walk-in freezer.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, this is the reactor, and we can 3-4 generation this every year.
Yeah.
By the time I'm done with this project, I'll need another job.
Yeah.
That's the time scale of this. We're looking within 10 years. Like, I'm going to need a whole new career.
Yeah.
Because that's how rapidly things move. And yes, when you're a scientist and discovery is your purview,
right,
and discovery has been taken from you in lieu of maintain the paradigm.
Science. Yeah, that's exactly.
Keep confirming the paradigm.
Yep.
Keep confirming the paradigm. That
conform to what we've proved.
The monies come from the confirmation of the paradigm.
Yeah.
The grants come from the confirmation of the paradigm.
That's
Unless the grant's coming from the Bigelow Institute, exploring contact with the afterlife.
Yeah.
It's to help expand the paradigm and to keep that in place and to make sure that this curricula is still followed at this university.
Yeah, but they have found ways to step outside of that because look at the CERN collider. I mean, honestly,
it's a huge one.
We don't even know what that thing is creating. They don't even know. You talk about a scientific experiment. It's like, let's see what this does.
The Hadron Collider, when they turned it on, was very much an Oppenheimer moment.
Oh, yes,
where,
it was.
And I remember the fervor in various communities of like, oh my God, another dimension's going to be ripped open.
We're seeing the tip of the iceberg, I believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is a whole new realm of technology. And to know that, once again, when you're talking about paranormal, things outside of the normal, we're just starting to burgeon on the technology that detects that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just got a MADAR system. I love my MADAR system. It detects magnetospheric anomalies in your area. So it's like, well, here's one quantitative point.
That's right.
That if we gather them, we can use AI and all kinds of things to examine things. And even looking at the new ways that we can apply technology to old evidence that's out there, be it cryptid, UFO, UAP, what have you. There are a ton of new methods for examining evidence and putting those things through the rigors of science.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. And, sort of looking at the other side of that equation is the human experience. And, I think that people are coming back around to traditional stories and saying, you know, I had this experience, you know, be it a Bigfoot or a Dogman or, you know, a winged humanoid, whatever it is. They're saying, this is what I experienced. And I think that, you know, I believe there are a few people that are at this point now where they experience something like that, they try to rationalize it, but then they realize that science doesn't have the answers for everything. So there's a certain level of comfort in knowing that science can't answer it because they haven't addressed it.
Yes.
So, you know, it makes these people say, well, I'm not crazy. It's just that it can't be explained yet. Yeah. So it's a very fascinating period in
being
that
the
sense.
Operative word.
Yeah. Exactly.
And we are coming up with all kinds of new things to see what the Bigelow Institute is doing once again with their study into near death.
Right.
And can we make contact with the other side? If you're a researcher doing that, get a hold of them, because if you can prove contact with the other side, there's a check with commas and zeros with your name on it. It's out there. They have already floated it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how these communities have truly not just overlapped, but come together over the last many years, David.
Yeah.
There have been more and more cross connections between these studies and even experiences amongst experiencers. Now, amongst your numerous books, number one, how many books are you in right now? Because you're going for every state in the U.S.
Oh, for the state series, number 14 just came out, which is Lone Star State Monsters, Cryptids and Legends of Texas.
Epic.
14 states and counting. There'll be another one announced probably in the next couple of weeks or so.
Incredible.
And obviously the goal is to do all 50 states.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to Native experiences, when it comes to the First Peoples experiences here in the United States, how many of our cryptids that we talk about in modern society, things like that, migrate over to the realm of oral tradition from their cultures?
An awful lot of them. So, you know, Bigfoot obviously is the easiest one. You can go all over the United States and talk to Native people if they'll talk to you. You know, if they're open enough to share their information, you'll find that there are traditions in tribes from east to west, you know, north to south. They have these legends about these hairy giants. A lot of times they're cannibal giants in some cases. In some cases, they're simply another race of sometimes they call them men, you know, but another race of these creatures that should be left alone and respected. Sometimes there's an idea that, we were at war with them at one point, but it stopped and we leave them alone, they leave us alone. So it's pretty fascinating. I'll tell you, you know, you talked about giants at the top of the conversation. And one of the things that has been really intriguing to me, many years ago, I was in a site called Lovelock Cave in Nevada. It's a whole legend around Lovelock Cave about the Sitika, which were these giant cannibal creatures that were attacking the native people in the region, the Utes, and they eventually had to band together with some other tribes in the region to go and fight these things, to go to war with them and to kill them because they were losing too many of their people, you know, their women and children and even hunters. And this whole idea of this war between a group of natives and some kind of cannibal giants, I thought that's really fascinating. You know, I found a similar story. There's a similar story in Idaho. And the more I've explored over the years, I have found that this seems to be almost a cultural memory because I have found similar stories in Arizona, Alaska. So there are these traditions that seem to be kind of consistent where it's slightly different in the location depending on the cultural perception. For instance, you go to Alaska and they had a fight with what they refer to as the tail men. And it was these large bipedal creatures that had a tail. And it sort of gets a little bit into the territory of what the Alaskans call a kushtaka or a kushtaka, which is a land otter man. So it's this giant bipedal otter thing, which sounds really weird and looks really weird when you see the artistic depictions. But the story is fascinating because it's another battle where the native people were being preyed on by these cannibal giants and had to go to war with them. And, you know, it raises a lot of questions for me because it's fascinating on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's like, what's the original source for these stories? I mean, we have some physical evidence from the Lovelock Cave, the Nevada story. The Nevada story is, first of all, it's not quite as old. There was a woman named Sarah Winnemucca who was a Paiute who was a child and heard these stories from her father, who was part of the whole tradition of fighting these things. Now, she had a dress that was adorned with red hair that she says came from these giants. Wow. You know, there's a lot of questionable stories. There were things that were pulled out of the Lovelock Cave site over the years when they did excavations in the cave that were very unusual. You know, they found 15-inch sandals, for instance. Now, you know, people today say, well, that's nothing as basketball players, but you go back to, you know, the 1800s.
I'm here to tell you, David, this is a 12-inch foot.
Right.
I wear a size 15.5 to 16.
Yeah.
I have a very overlarge foot.
Yep.
That ain't 15 inches.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Something with 15-inch feet is way bigger than me, and I run about 6'3".
Exactly. and you have to bear in mind, you know, that we're talking about a period when people were smaller in stature in general. You know, that's that's scientific evidence. Well, you know, that's just would have been highly unusual.
Our mass amount of food and things like that is what allowed us to grow this size.
Exactly. Yeah, one of the things that really intrigues me about some of these native tales, you know, Lovelock Cave is a great example because in later periods, what happened was Lovelock Cave, the site, which you can still visit and go into, the legend is that the natives chased these cannibals up to this cave. The cannibals refused to come out. So the natives piled the front entry to the cave up with brush and gave these creatures plenty of warnings and said, come out and fight like men. The creatures refused to. So the natives lit this brush up and they burned out the whole cave. Now, we know this really happened because you can go in Lovelock Cave today and the scorch marks are still there. There was, you know, where the fire was. With the cave being abandoned so long, of course, bats took up residence and, you know, bat guano was being produced in there. So at one point, these guys who were digging bat guano went in the cave. They were digging all this guano out and they started finding artifacts. And they thought at first, oh, this is connected to the native people. So even today, you talk about, you know, maintain the party line, right? Even today, historians say, well, this is, the native people lived in this cave. You know, the Paiutes lived in this cave. You go to the site.
They didn't.
They say they did not. They are adamant. We were not cave dwellers. Our ancestors did not live in caves. None of our people have. We do not live in caves. It's really funny because you go to the site and there's a couple of placards up for, you know, that designate this Lovelock Cave. And there's one that has this whole thing saying, you know, the native people lived in this. And the native people, somebody has went up there and scratched this out. You know, you can't read what it used to say. You know?
Epic.
And they won't allow that to be on there because they're adamant. We did not live in those caves. Now, there's legends that giant bones were taken out of that cave.
Yeah.
And were put on display for a time. Of course, you know, there's no record of that. You know, we don't know what happened to those. Yeah. We don't know where they went.
One of the many supposed Smithsonian cases. Things making it to them and never coming into the public eye.
That particular case is pretty fascinating because there's actually written memories from people who said that they saw giant bones on display in Virginia City. In Nevada, that supposedly came from Lovelock Cave. And even, I think it's Mark Twain wrote about remembering seeing a giant bones on display. So, you know, given the period, you can take that a lot of different ways. It's like, well, you know, it was the era of dime museums.
Age of tall tales. Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, we got to wonder with all the other things that sort of support that legend, what's the reality behind it?
Well, and also, David, just the fact of... how many things do we rediscover?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Not just technologically. I mean, I just posted an article yesterday. I don't know if I shared it with you, but I will. About a previously thought extinct bird that is now all over New Zealand.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love those stories.
And it's one of those, like, this thing has been thought extinct for so long. And now, no, apparently there is a huge breeding population in New Zealand. Yeah. We find new species. Even during the pandemic, when everybody was at home, there were 200 new species
That's
found.
Right. That's right.
Like, we discover new species on the regs.
Yeah.
So to think even with our haughtiness that we have explored all of the United States. Feel free to look at a map of it at night. Look at a picture at night from ISS. It's three-quarters dark.
I tell people that all the time.
It's three-quarters dark.
I tell people all that. There's so many people who are doubters for, in terms of a lot of these cryptid sightings and everything. I say, you have to understand, the average person lives in or around a metropolis. They're in the city all the time, working or shopping or whatever they're doing. So, there's people, it's like this. There's people everywhere all around us all the time. They can't conceive of this idea of, here's a stretch of land that a human hasn't walked across for, decades, maybe, hundreds of years. Yeah. And, the average state, of course, the Northeast, is really concentrated with a lot of people, but there's a lot of wild areas up there still.
A ton.
And
3/4 of Maine. Yeah. 3/4 of Maine.
Yeah. I was
totally still wild, rugged land.
That's right. Hadn't been too long since I was up in Maine, and I
lived there for 5 years.
Man, it's just it's incredible.
Absolutely. Yep. And interestingly enough, at MUFON Con last week, I spoke with Thiago Cicchetti. Mm-hmm. He is get this, the sole MUFON investigator for Brazil.
Oh, gosh.
I was like, brother, I will pray for you daily, the number of reports that come out of Brazil. Wow. Now, granted, that is just out of cities. Yeah. Like he said, if you go to the rural areas that are almost inaccessible, you go to these villages, things like that, ask them. It's not just the fact that it's a 2-day one-way trip for them to go make a report. They don't know how to use a computer. Ain't never seen one.
Right. Yeah. Probably don't have telephones.
But it's also the fact of, even if they did, they wouldn't go report it because it is not out of the ordinary for them, David.
Exactly.
It is regularity. Yep. It's like, why would we come tell you there's nothing strange? Yeah. We see these lights all the time.
Yeah. Right.
So it's kind of the same concept where it's like when you get to these native areas, when you get to the areas where they've lived on reservation since we put them on reservation.
Right.
They see things that we don't see because they are living out in that wilderness. Yeah. On a regular basis, as opposed to just passing through for a weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to people, both native and Anglo, in rural areas of places like Utah and Montana. And, the reports from out there, it's like, we see these things, there's stuff going on all the time out here. Oh, yeah. And, it's a number of things. I think that also those people have a different level of perception, I find, because they pay attention.
Well, because they are connected with the land. No different than somebody who hunts or traps for a living. Yeah. When they go out in the woods, they have a different sensory perception than any one of us who lives in the city. They are keenly and astutely aware of the smells of their game. Yeah. The smells of their game's leavings. Yeah. Everything. Though even the way that the wildlife reacts to them is different because of the presence that they put out in the wilderness.
That's correct.
So
that's correct.
Yeah,
they're not in a city with their heads down in their phone and heading for their cubicle or their Starbucks run or whatever it is. So
and yes, very much the fact of we have lost that connection with the land. There's quite a few people who still farm and stuff like that, but if you go back to my grandparents, great-grandparents' day, things like that where, hey, man, when it got dark in Mamou, Louisiana, you didn't have a lantern or a fat lamp. Guess what? It's dark, Jack.
That's the way it was where I grew up,
It's dark. Yeah. You ain't seeing nothing unless it's inside those walls with a fat lamp or unless it's a really well moonlit night. Yeah. But at the same token, they were totally aware of every piece, every game track that came across, every game trail that went across their property. Like, they depended on hunting and trapping to not only feed their family, but to make their money.
Yeah,
you know?
And I think that technology has advanced so rapidly, and certainly in my lifetime, that I don't think people have quite caught up with how to fully adapt to it. I mean, I'm very grateful that I grew up in an era without a computer at my fingertips.
Yeah,
and it's the internet's a real.
you got a different set of tools in your bag.
Yeah,
David.
and I always default back to those. I like to talk to people. I like to go to the locations. I like to if it's it's a rural spot that somebody saw this troll or whatever it was. I want to go out there and see what it's like, get a vibe for it. So that's definitely still my approach.
What has been amongst your stacks of books, David? What has been the most remarkable story that has stuck with you since you found out about it?
Oh gosh. I would really have to think about that. There's so many, in any given state, I could pluck out, wow. I mean, some of the encounters with black-eyed kids, with shadow people, some of the ghost sightings, and and I tell you something that really has stuck with me a lot in the last few years of doing this series on states. Every state has some kind of a unique cryptid, usually, that is very much a part of that region or locale or whatever. But the other thing I have found is that every state has a lot of Bigfoot sightings. But I constantly find these Bigfoot sightings that are just weird. They're not the standard, I saw this, 8-foot tall creature that walked by, like the Patterson-Gimlin film or something. I've got one, and I'll actually share this one because I'll be talking about it in my lecture tomorrow, which I'm doing Monsters of the Wild West, as you know. So there's a whole bunch of different accounts. But there was an incident in Montana with these two teenage girls. And this is, gosh, if I'm remembering right, it was in the 1970s. And these girls were out on their, one of them's family's farm, and they're just kind of, messing around, doing whatever. And they see this creature over by their horses that's kind of annoying the horses or something. And they're looking at this thing and thinking, what is? They didn't know what it was. It was a Bigfoot. They described it, and they said, here's this creature. So one of the girls has a rifle, and she fires a shot up in the air. Nothing happens. And they're sort of watching, and they decide, well, I'm going to try again. This girl fires another shot in the air. This time the Bigfoot reacts. It drops down to the ground as if it's been shot or was close to being shot, and it starts to commando crawl across the ground towards these bushes. Now, as it gets towards the bushes, two other creatures come out, reach out, and help pull it into the bushes. So it's getting to safety. So, I call it the commando crawl Bigfoot, and it's just so bizarre. And, there's some things that compound the interest of the sighting, because in the aftermath, there was actually a sheriff in the area who was investigating Bigfoot sightings at the time, taking it serious.
Wow.
He talked to these girls. He went to the location. He gave them polygraph tests, which was a big thing in the 70s. They both passed with flying colors. The sheriff found out that, there's all these people in this whole rural community reporting hearing these things scream at night. Other sightings are reported. So there are these Bigfoot creatures in this area. But, I mean, what a bizarre reaction. It doesn't react the first time, but the second time it's goes into this whole drama.
Kind of the same way with the recent cattle mutilations right down the road here in Texas, where they looked, and then randomly one day the sheriff's department had it posted on social media.
Yeah.
Like, anybody got an idea or an answer?
Yep.
Feel free to give us a call.
I know.
Because we are stumped.
Yeah. Strange stuff.
Yeah. And we are right up against it with so many things right now. It's great to see such an awesome crowd here at Dogman, here to talk about these topics, here to share their stories, share their experiences.
Yeah, great group of people.
It's fantastic. It's been great. I love being able to sit back, chat with you, all the researchers, and but more than anything, it's the people, it's the stories, it's the experiences that they share that are absolutely beautiful, man.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks so much for the time. Let everybody know where they can go to find your literal library catalog of books other than the Curious Realm store.
So, of course, everything's on Amazon.com. Just search my name. And you can also go to my website, which is eerielights.com. That is with 2 E's, EERIE lights.com. And you'll find, of course, links to all the books there, tons of links for interviews, television appearances, other things that I'm up to, too, because I'm usually a pretty busy guy. I do documentaries and write all kinds of articles and books and lots of other projects in the pipeline.
Heck yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Always good talking with you.
Absolutely. Please, everybody, while you were online checking out all of the amazing work from David Weatherly, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is where you can find all the episodes. That's where you can like, subscribe, share. That is where you can join our experiencer page if you have had contact with the other side, if you have had an ET or UFO experience or experience with a cryptid. Stop on by CuriousRealm.com/stories. Share your experience and evidence with us. We will share it with our experts and see what answers we can find for you. Stay tuned through these commercial breaks. We will come back with the conclusion of our first day of coverage here at the second annual Dogman and Cryptid Conference in White Settlement, Texas, from the Paranormal Round Table. We'll be right back after this.